Thank you so much for staying with us.
Yes,
and we're
indeed.
getting into our impact conversation today, which takes us to the Niger Delta area of Nigeria. Now, in a victory for environmentalists and Nigerian farmers whose lands were polluted by oil leaks and spills, a Dutch appeals court on Friday, January the 29th, ordered energy giant Royal Dutch Shell's Nigerian subsidiary to compensate farmers in 2 villages for damage to their land caused by leaks in 2004 and 2005. The Hague Court of Appeals held Shell Nigeria liable for 2 leaks that spilled oil over an area the size of about 60 football pitches in 2 villages, saying that it could not be established beyond a reasonable doubt that saboteurs were to blame.
Well, under Nigerian law, which was applied in the Dutch civil case, the company is not liable if the leaks were the result of sabotage. Now, the case had dragged on since being filed back in 2008, and 2 of the farmers who brought the case unfortunately have passed away. Now, Shell has a long history of pollution, damage to environment and human rights in Nigeria, with years which have gone by, and we're still hearing issues of abandoned spillages in the Niger Delta region of the country.
So what does this verdict mean for communities in the Niger Delta? What's even the status of the much lauded Ogoni land cleanup? And how do we address the environmental issues around this? Our guest is one of Nigeria's leading environmental activists, Nimo Bassi. He chaired Friends of the Earth International from 2008 to 2012 and was the executive director of Environmental Rights Action for 2 decades. He was also one of Time magazine's Heroes of the Environment in 2009. And truly, there's probably no better person to discuss this issue with. Nimo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start with this. Now, this is the first time that a Dutch company has been brought before a Dutch court to account for environmental damage that it caused abroad. It is also the latest stage in a case that is breaking new legal ground in how far multinationals in the Netherlands can be held responsible for actions of their overseas subsidiaries. So what does this judgment really mean for the communities affected by the spills and the leaks in the Niger Delta?
The judgment means many things to the suffering communities in the Niger Delta at different levels. First of all, it shows that the international community is not deaf or blind to the devastation that transnational corporations have brought about in their communities. Secondly, that if justice cannot be attained in their home country, Nigeria, justice can be found in the home country of those who are causing the harms that they're suffering. It also shows that communities who have not been able to take their cases to the courts can rise up if they have if they're justified to take up their cases to the court, feeling that, knowing that somebody would listen no matter how long it takes before such a decision comes. So I think it's a very good and significant judgment for the communities, for the environment, and for those who are just watching to know whether there's a possibility of ever getting justice.
You might just say precedents, you have to say. But Nimo, let me ask you now, establishing a duty of care, on the parent company in this aspect of the case could break new legal grounds and have implications on where future cases are brought. Now, with more companies facing action where they are headquartered rather than where the alleged pollution has taken place, how do you think duty of care will play out in environmental issues around the world, not just in Nigeria?
Yes. The interesting thing is that whenever these polluting corporations and entities are taken to court in their home countries for crimes committed elsewhere, they always say, well, the entity, the unit, the national arm in Nigeria, in wherever, is not, what they do does not affect us. That we don't have a control over what is going on in those places. And they've used this argument many times and succeeded. But, if you see, some courts have actually in the past looked at the traffic of communications between the parent company and the branches working in other countries. And it's so intense, especially when it's a conflict. The communication is so intense, so that there's a direct link between the parent company and the branches working elsewhere. And so I think the significance of this judgment is that the lie that there's a separation between Shell Nigeria and Royal Dutch Shell is just that, a lie. Because they are one. It's just a technical thing in the court or in terms of legality to say that this is registered here, this is registered there, and we all know. So the cover has been blown, and this is a real clear indication that look, you can run, but you cannot hide.
And I think a lot of people, especially those fighting the environmental battle, will take notice of this verdict particularly. Now, we hear that a former employee of Shell and an oil expert, Kay Holtzman, recently alleged in a letter to the United Nations Environment Program that Shell is trying to conceal data on the potential health effects of its oil spills in the Bodo community in the Niger Delta. He said there are astonishingly high levels of pollution, with swamps soaked with hydrocarbons, and he suggests the need for medical mass screening of the people in the area following their exposure to dangerous pollution arising from the oil spill. But Shell has not yet published the data. Now, when we talk about the farmers having to take Shell and whoever else to court outside of Nigeria, the conversation has to always ask this question: who regulates and monitors the operations of Shell in this regard in country? And why was it that it seemed that the farmers couldn't get justice in their own country?
That's a loaded political question, but let's just try to respond to it. We know the relationship between transnational corporations and the operations in the global south, not just in Nigeria, is extremely colonial. We have to understand that. And if you look back in history, some people will refuse to look into history, but you can't avoid it. If you look back to history, these transnational merchants and companies were the ones originally colonizing the territories. And then when it became inconvenient for them to continue, or expensive for them to do that, to use mercenaries to pacify the people, they handed over to the imperial political systems. And then the formal colonialism began. And so even the colonial powers, although they've taken over and handed over back to independence, there's still a very strong power base that connects those historical arrangements to what is going on today. And so even in a place like Nigeria, the oil companies are extremely powerful politically. They have influence on our legislation. I remember some years back, one top African executive of one of these corporations said they would not accept any law that is made in Nigeria that's against their interest.
Wow.
And they were talking about the PIB then. And this is documented. It was in the international press conference in Abuja that they wouldn't accept, so blatant, before the international media, before Nigerian media and the Nigerian government, in the seat of the Nigerian government, that anything against their interests, they wouldn't accept it. In other words, they have to detect what laws. And because of the arrangement, the kind of law we have here, the joint venture arrangement, which appears to be very nationalistic, when Nigeria began to nationalize the companies to some extent, and then Nigeria took the bigger share in terms of arrangement of profits and other things, and left the operations to the corporations. Now, the corporations are the ones who operate the fields, who detect what the cost of operation is, of course, excluding the environmental cost because they don't pay anything. And then whatever they declare to be the profit is what the Nigerian government shares. It has a share in, more or less. And so we have a arrangement that is patently against the interests of the people and the environment.
All right, Nemo, I need to ask you this because we know that Nigeria, the West African country where we are now, is one of the largest producers of oil in the world. Now, according to the Department of Petroleum Resources, since 1970 to 2015, more than 16,000 spillages have occurred in the Niger Delta alone, with occasions about 3 million barrels spilled in the environment. More than 70% of that not recovered. Even over 69% of these spills happened offshore. A quarter of, we've seen swarms, land spillages with like Shell, and we know that Shell is not the only guilty party here. So that brings me to the question. There are other companies operating in the Niger Delta. Do you think that with this ruling, the landmark decision by the Dutch courts, that other companies might get fingered in this?
I hope so. In the past, there's been cases against Exxon Mobil, there's been cases against Chevron in San Francisco, especially in the case of the human rights abuse on Paraguay platform on 28 May. 1998. And so there's been, this just lays the foundation to the fact that, look, we have to clearly look at what is going on in the Niger Delta. You mentioned the amount of oil spills. Between 2018 and 2019, there were 1,300 oil spills in the Niger Delta, coming to 5 oil spills a day.
Wow.
Within 2 years. This was information from NOSRA, the National Oil Spills Detection and Response Agency. So it's not something cooked up by one activist or one group in the corner. So the level of devastation is astonishing. I personally go to Ogoniland once in a while, fairly regularly, just to remind myself that this environment is in a bad shape and that we cannot afford to be quiet over it. So whether right now, there are ongoing oil spills somewhere, whether it's from Eni, whether it's from corn oil, whether it's from Atoy, which is a Nigerian companies, whether it's Chevron, and the rest are oil spills ongoing. And some of the oil spills, companies are denying it's not from their facilities. So when you have 4 or 5 companies or 3 companies operating in one region, there's an oil spill, it's now the duty of the regulatory agencies to verify and track the source of the oil, because they all have fingerprints.
Yeah.
So we need to have sufficient laboratories, sufficiently equipped to be able to track and trace and label and identify where these spills came from. So yes, it should be a time for all international oil companies to wake up and get ready.
And on this issue of people saying it's not our oil that's spilling, this is why I also find this the verdict from the Dutch court interesting, because there's still one spill that is in contention right now. The court has ordered that Shell actually fit a leak detection device, some kind of device to detect when leaks happen on that particular issue. But let's get to Ogoniland now. For many people who hear about the Niger Delta, this is sort of the word or the name that they hear the most. So the United Nations Environment Programme's environmental assessment of Ogoniland found ongoing pollution across the region. It found hydrocarbon contamination in water in some sites to be 1,000 times higher than is actually permitted under Nigerian drinking water standards, and also recommended a comprehensive cleanup of Ogoniland, estimating that it would take between 20 to 30 years. So this report came out in 2011. It was 4 years after that President Buhari ordered the cleanup of the area. This is 2021. Nimo, tell us, what is the status of the Ogoniland cleanup as it stands?
I would say that the entire saga is very disappointing and sad, considering the extent of damage that the environment has suffered in Ogoniland. Since when the report was issued, the report issued indicated that there were some emergency measures that should be carried out, including providing alternative drinking water for the Ogoni people. And as we speak, that has not been done. The best that the agency that was set up to remediate and restore the environment has done has been to begin a process of rehabilitating, together with the River State government, of existing waterworks in the region, which have been moribund for a long time. So the people still depend on buying this what Nigerians call pure water, and buying water in trucks of which quality nobody really knows, nobody tests to find out. And so the people are still exposed to drinking polluted water. The same thing about the soil. The soils are devastatingly polluted. Now, the process of high prep has not been as vigorous as high prep ought to be. High prep has been rather slow. And of course, as I said, the emergency measures have not been provided. And there's been a number of factors, but I think the thing now is that high prep has to wake up and step up to do what needs to be done, because so far it's not been a question of finance. There's money in the bank.
Yeah.
The polluters have put some money on the table, and that money is still there waiting to be utilized. And just a question of high prep and the Ministry of Environment working together, finding the right processes and expediting the execution of the project. Otherwise, it will be a big shame. You have the financial resources and yet the job is not being done as expected.
All right, Nimo, with this ruling from the Dutch court, we know that the amounts that Shell must pay in damages will be decided at a later date. But we can look at what British Petroleum, BP, had paid out since the Deepwater Horizon spill back in 2010. So far, it's been about $70 billion. That is made up of federal and state lawsuits, fines, and even money towards the cleanup. Now, what are some of the things you think will be considered when it comes to assigning damages come when that date comes for Shell and the courts and the Nigerian farmers?
Yeah.
The pollution cases that went to the court are very, I wouldn't say distinct, but they give us indications about what kind of damage occurred. If I take the case of Goni, that has no pipeline passing through the territory, no oil well located in the community, but it's a tidal river creek system that brought pollution from somewhere else, and the place caught fire. That's the main litigant, Chief Bariza, lost his home, lost his bakery, lost his school that he built, that he was running the community, and the entire community, more or less the entire community, had been damaged by the pollution. So the people are displaced, living as refugees since for over all this period, since about 2004, 2005. And so if you look at the whole community displaced, how do you compute that in terms of funds? Yeah. You see the environment completely polluted, devastated. You can't drink any water, even if you sink a well, a borehole in Goi community. I'm not sure you go, unless you go to the second aquifer, you're not going to get to water that is clean enough for human consumption. And that's very expensive business to dig deep enough to get clean water. The air is filled with toxic fumes from hydrocarbon. When you go to Ogoni land, some villages like Bodo, like Goi, if you are just a visitor, within 5 minutes you develop a headache. Wow. Because the stench, the level of pollution in the air is so much, and the children are there, living there, dancing there, swimming in the polluted water. And one day I met a block of children, a number of children swimming in water that's covered with crude oil. It took me a long time to get them out of the water, with a lot of teasing and playing, and then they come out, and then I asked, just to make small talk with the children, I asked them, what would you like to be in future? Now, first of all, why are you swimming here? They said they don't have any option, that they have to have recreation. This is a river that nature has given to them. Some fortunate is polluted, but they have no alternative. So I asked them, okay, in the future, what do you want to be? Only one out of about 20 kids said he would want to be a nurse. One said he would be a teacher, which was nice. The rest said they want to be politicians. And so the question was, why do you want to be politicians? Because they see the politicians that oppress us as those who are the richest, the ones who are not productive but control everything. And so you see, now the damage is that there's a psychological damage in the communities. With children who had never seen a clean river, they never seen clean farmland, everything is polluted. So how do you pay for that? The case of Ikoda Daudo was an oil well that was spilling crude oil, and there are videos of it openly, and everybody, people who never saw us, the Senate went there, the House already went there, people went, it was on national TV before the polluter Shell went to stop that spill. So we have oil spill going continuously for 3 months. Just think about that. 3 months, spewing at high pressure. And the thing is that the company is capable of detecting when there's an oil spill. As the judge rightly said, so they should be able to establish things that would make them see what is going on. But they have meters, they have ways of checking the pressures. Okay. But over the years, let's say this, my personal belief, I may be wrong, but this is what I believe, that they actually benefit from allowing pollution to go on. Wow. Because then nowadays, if you ask anyone, most people will tell you that pollution is caused by local people.
Sabotage.
By the community. And so they don't police the pipeline. They don't do anything when if there's an incident, even whether it's equipment failure or third-party interference, the first thing they say is sabotage. But we need to understand that sabotage is a political action. And we saw in the days of militancy that when there was going to be sabotage, it was announced in the media, announced by email. Papers, this group will say, we're going to blow a pipeline on this date at this location. And then they go ahead and blow it. That is sabotage. But for people to steal, to break pipe to steal, that is not sabotage. That is all theft. And the corporations have been fingered in this kind of processes. So it's neither here nor there. Wherever there's a pollution, whether it's sabotage or oil thefts, the oil companies have a duty to clean up the environment. And for over 60 years, there's not one oil spill that has been properly, adequately cleaned up in the Niger Delta.
Nimo, we have to have you back because we're just scratching the surface of this conversation. So it's going to be difficult for you, for anyone to really put a figure to the damage, psychological, both physical, to people who have had lands in this area for generations. So we look at that. We also need to look at the fact that now, because this land is polluted, we've seen increases in armed robbery, kidnapping, education is a massive issue, medicine, healthcare is a massive issue in this region as well. But we have to have you back at another time for this. We can see how passionate you are about this, and we appreciate your time, Nimo Bassi, for breaking down this part of the conversation, of a larger conversation. So we look forward to having you back.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Nimo Bassi, environmental activist, and raising a lot more questions for me than been answered. Again, I'm still just struck by the fact that Nigerians have to leave their country to go and find justice elsewhere for crimes committed in country. That part is something I'm going to find difficult to get over.
His story about the kids swimming in oil spill waters and, you know, what they want to be in future, that basically paints a picture of the almost irreparable damage, you know, to these oil regions in the Niger Delta. And we do hope that, you know, someday, you know, it's beyond justice now. Healing that land, those fishes, those farms, those houses, those properties, those children, their futures. We need to heal. That's it. I think I'll rest my case on that one for now.